Welcome to the Social Network Society podcast. The Social Network Society is a community aimed to foster meaningful connections among scholars engaged in research, teaching, and practice of social networks.
In this podcast series, we'll spotlight recently published peer-reviewed articles and uncover more about the fascinating world of social networks through the lens of authors. We will also engage in discussions with faculty regarding their experiences teaching social networks to diverse audiences, as well as addressing related topics such as maintaining a healthy work-life balance, navigating the job market, and more in subsequent podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by the Social Network Society Communications Team and is sponsored by the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Your hosts today are Thea Tomova Shakur, an assistant professor in the Management and Leadership Department at Texas Christian University.
Danny Yin, assistant professor at Penn State University.
And Jason Ross, assistant professor at Western Carolina University.
We're very excited because today we're launching our first teaching-related podcast. We're so grateful to be joined by three incredible professors. Burt, professor at University of Chicago and Bocconi University, Adam Kleinbaum, professor at Dartmouth, and Bill McEvily, professor at the University of Toronto.
And Kentucky.
And Kentucky.
You've heard.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Each of our guests brings a distinct approach to teaching social networks, shaped by extensive experience working with a wide range of audiences. Together, they offer rich perspectives on pedagogical strategies, course design, and the challenges and opportunities involved in making network concepts both rigorous and accessible across contexts. We are very grateful to you all for being here today.
Happy to be with you.
Thank you for inviting us.
First, we'll start with a broad question designed for all three of you to answer, and that is, how did you get into the profession? Did you always know you wanted to be an academic?
Shall we go by age?
Go for it.
I had no intention of being an academic. The pay is awful. And the reason I ended up in it was I had to carry a job as an undergrad, and a wonderful professor named Nan Lin saw that I was industrious and said, if you'll work this hard for that guy, imagine what you'll do for me. And what he did was give me a key and a little stack of cards. And he said, these are called network data. Go look it up. This is the key to the computer room. And at night, you can take the whole thing. And it was a mini computer. And so I just started during my junior year doing this, earning money and solving incredible puzzles while Led Zeppelin was playing on the portable player. I thought, this is a career? This is fantastic. And off it went.
I think I'm next in the age hierarchy here, so I'll go next. It was in the back of my mind, even as an undergrad, actually. I was really curious and didn't want a typical corporate job. I had done an internship in Xerox and realized very quickly that wasn't for me. But I decided to try consulting first, and it was a blast. I worked for a company now called Accenture, traveled around the world, fun projects, etc. But I got to a point in my career, a critical juncture, where I was either going to really go for it and go up, or I was going to go out. It was time to decide. I was on the cusp of being promoted to manager. And I'll never forget the day that I went in to tell my manager that I was leaving. And he blurted out immediately before he could respond, or more in a composed manner, "You SOB." Not SOB. He said the actual phrase. And I wasn't expecting that reaction. He said, "I was just about to come tell you that I'm stepping down from this project and you're taking over." But I liked learning a lot about different companies and then taking what I learned and moving them to other companies. But that's not really what that consulting company was about. Once you got good at something, they wanted you to do it again and again and again. So that was really tedious. So I took a year off. I went back to my undergraduate institution, connected with an economics professor, and he really helped coach me into PhD programs, and I landed at the University of Minnesota.
Thanks for sharing. Adam?
Great. Thank you, Thea. I'll bring up the rear behind my two more esteemed colleagues. My story is a little bit different. I was pre-med when I was in college, and when I figured out that I actually didn't want to be a doctor, I didn't really know what else to do with myself. So, like Bill, I worked for a little while in management consulting, ended up leaving that job to follow my girlfriend at the time to New York. She's now my wife, so that turned out to be a good call. And when I moved to New York, I got a job at a financial services firm during the run up to the dot-com boom around 2000. And it was a fun and exciting time. I was in an internal consulting group for the financial services firm, trying to figure out how we could launch new businesses internally that would leverage technology and especially internet technology and combine it with the existing resources of the businesses that the firm was in. And so, in order to do that, I spent a lot of time talking with senior leaders in the different businesses in the organization and learned two things from that. One is, like Bill, a corporate job wasn't really for me. I knew that pretty quickly. And two is I learned that the way things get done in big companies is through informal networks. So I was very fortunate to have this moment of realization that there are people whose job it is to study how things get done in big companies like these. And that's what I went to grad school to do and have been fortunate enough to be doing ever since.
So a follow-up question, how did you get into conducting social network research more specifically?
Let's do reverse order. Adam, you did so well. You set us up for your dissertation paper.
Yeah.
True. Yeah, my story follows pretty clearly from the last experience. Yeah, I went to grad school to better understand the role that informal networks play in innovation, because that's what I had been doing or trying to do in the financial services company, and started working with Mike Tushman, who was well known as an innovation scholar, but who also had studied informal networks earlier in his career. And together with Mike, I was able to study a large, well-known company that was doing innovation. And they were an IT company. And when I told them I was interested in, exploring the role that informal networks played within these innovation projects, one of the executives there said to me, we're a tech company. Why don't you look at our communications data in order to see how to do that? And that was the door that opened that enabled my dissertation and everything that's come since.
I have to comment. It's really fun hearing everybody else's stories too. So my story, I landed at the University of Minnesota in a strategy department. It's very interdisciplinary. And the reason I wanted to get a PhD is I really wanted to study collaboration and why firms do it, how, and new ways of collaborating and all that. So anything related to collaboration, I was in on it. And that meant micro OB courses on up to political science and everything in between. I happened to take a course on interorganizational relations taught by Joe Galaskowitz, who was in the sociology department, but had a joint appointment. I had never taken a sociology course in my life. And week, I don't know what, 4 or something, there was this article on the problem of embeddedness by Mark Granovetter. And I like to say, I read it and the skies opened up and suddenly my life journey was all clear to me. It wasn't really that, but it really captivated me. And I didn't fully understand it when I read it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so as time went on, it just kept going back to Joe, taking all of his courses, network methods, and independent study. He must have gotten sick of me. But honestly, it really didn't come together for me until Ron's book on structural holes came out, which I found very challenging at the first pass. So it was many passes. And in fact, I think the first time I met Ron, he came to give a talk at Minnesota while I was working on my dissertation, which was a great joy and excitement. And he gave me great advice at that time. But once I really started to understand a little bit better what that was about, my dissertation came together very quickly and I was hooked. I just, there was no turning back.
As you say, good stories. Although I've heard yours a couple times, Adam. It's a wonderful story. Mine is opportunistic, perhaps not surprisingly. the data that Nan Lin gave me were data on adoptions of innovations behind an advertising campaign in El Salvador. And he just said, just look at the data, figure out why some people are adopting and why others aren't. So there's the puzzle. Of course, it's intimately linked with networks. But I got to use Fortran to write code on this. I got to analyze the data so all the stats get used. And there was no end of puzzles I could solve. It just went one after another. These puzzles just fell down in front of network analysis. So I said, why would I look at anything else? And just continued enjoying it. And it's been a few years now.
Thanks all for sharing these wonderful stories.
Okay, so let's pivot a little bit into talking about the PDW at AOM. I believe it's entering its 14th year now. So I guess could you all talk a little bit about how the origins of the Teaching Social Networks PDW developed?
Maybe I'll field that one first, since I'm the one who is guilty of getting that started. So it started when Martin Gargiulo and I were serving on the executive committee of OMT, and we were at a meeting and we were talking about the program and so on. And one of the things that kept coming up again and again is that the division was having a really hard time getting people to propose and run professional development workshops on teaching in particular.
Yeah.
Just wasn't popular, but the academy was very committed to that for obvious reasons. And so during one of the breaks, I said, Martin, let's go take a walk. And I said, what do you think about that? And he said, yeah, well, I understand people have other priorities. I said, what do you think about us doing a PDW specifically on teaching social networks? And he was immediately excited by the idea, in part because Martin is an entrepreneur. And he not only is incredibly talented and gifted in what he's done in his research, but he's brought that into the classroom and he's developed great tools to assist in teaching social networks. And so he saw that as an exciting opportunity. And so, with that, we reached out to some people to see if others would think that it would be interesting, and they all thought so, said, let's give it a go. I'm not sure what we anticipated in terms of its longevity, but we're quite happy that it's still around, and we're going to be submitting a proposal again this year as well.
I guess, can you tell a little bit, looking back on the PDW, what's some moments that's maybe stood out as most memorable or impactful for you all? It could be something you or other people shared, maybe a discussion that shifted your way of thinking, a teaching idea, something that you really took away from it.
I'm going to violate the rule here of going first again. Sorry, only because I really like this question. And honestly, the thing that stands out the most to me is the response that we've gotten from the community. And in particular, I want to acknowledge that both Ron and Adam have been speakers, and Adam also took up the mantle as the organizer for several years. That's been by far the most memorable, rewarding experiences, to have people really not just help us out and do us a favor, but really say, yeah, that is something that could be useful for us and that we should spend time doing. And then quickly on that, and then I'll pass it over to the others. We've had a number of people participate over the years, but Marissa King really stands out for me because Marissa came as a PhD student. She had just landed her first job at Yale, and she was very funny. She came up to me. I said, oh, nice to meet you. I'm Bill, and we hadn't met before. And she's like, thank you so much for organizing this. I'm like, yeah, sure. She goes, I'm scheduled to start teaching my first class in like a few weeks, and I have no idea what to do, and I've got all these ideas. So that was just really great. That was exactly what we were hoping to accomplish. But then 2 years later, Marissa was one of the invited speakers, and she gave back, and she had this great material.
Wonderful. I can't add anything to that, Adam.
So Bill said most of what I was going to say. I'll just add two small bits to it. The first was I felt like the PDW helped me to develop my own teaching style in a way that was immensely valuable. And I remember clearly one of the first PDWs that I went to. Ron, you were one of the speakers, and everybody who's ever heard Ron give a talk knows the immense color that he brings to his presentation style. And it's something that I admire greatly and have tried to emulate insofar as I'm capable, which is not very far. But I remember the line that really grabbed my attention that Ron delivered at that PDW, and you'll tell me if I got it right, Ron. You were talking about the importance of status and how that can sometimes backfire, and you said the higher the baboon climbs, the more people can see its ass. And it just delivered in like the perfect tone, and the room just completely collapsed in laughter. And it really inspired me to think a little bit more carefully, not just about what I'm teaching, but how I'm teaching it. And I think that's been a useful takeaway for me from the PDW. So that's one. The second goes back to what Bill said about people. And as Bill mentioned, after he and Martin ran the PDW for a number of years, he was kind enough to sort of entrust it to Isabel Fernandez Mateo and to me. And Isabel was someone who I had known from a distance and admired greatly as a scholar, but didn't really get to know as a human being until we worked together to organize the PDW for a number of years. And I think more generally, beyond just this particular PDW, one of the things I really love and appreciate about the Academy is the opportunity to just get to know people who are both brilliant and wonderful. And being able to work with Isabel was a great experience for me on that front.
So let's dive into the classrooms and about the courses that you teach and other content. First, can you give us a little sneak peek into your classes? What are the primary topics you talk about? What is your audience? And stuff like that.
Maybe I'll go first just to shake things up a little bit. So, not surprisingly, and I would bet that the same is true of both Ron and Bill, networks make their way into almost everything I teach to almost every audience. I have a session on networks in my core MBA class, some content on networks in a class I teach to master's in engineering management students. There's some work on networks in a leading change course that I teach for healthcare executives. But the one I want to give you a little sneak peek into is a very unusual course format that we offer at the Tuck School, which is called a Research to Practice seminar. And I think what's really distinctive about it is how research-based the content is. It's offered to MBA students, but if you took a quick look at the syllabus, you might think it's the syllabus for a PhD seminar. And what's really fun about the course is we introduce MBA students to original research on the topic of networks, spend a little bit of time helping them understand what research was done and what it found, and then spend the rest of our time talking about what it means for them in the real world. And I think the ability to see research meet practice in that way in the MBA classroom is a lot of fun and is really distinctive. And it's something I enjoy teaching a lot.
That's a nice lineup. Since I was quiet before, I'll cut in here, but I suspect we overlap considerably in this. The audience matters tremendously. So with master's students or MBAs, I use the material that's posted on my website, which is 8 handouts keyed to how does the social fabric around a person limit and enhance their ability to create value. And so the network overlaps with information, and then brokerage and closure get played through. For execs, I typically do a day, and the first hour is foundations. And then I wait to see what they get excited about. And I've got a set of handouts I can move pretty much in any direction. And depending on what they pull on, that becomes the subject of discussion. And since they're pulling it down, they're sort of into it. And the angle of the instruction is not so much colorful metaphor, which is a lot of executive education, although that plays its role, but real substantive work. This is what it's based on. Here's the 10,000 people that we ran through. Here's what the results look like. This is why we believe what we believe. One of the key things they walk away with is, damn, I just never had any idea that there's that kind of substance to this topic. The last is more akin to what Adam mentioned, which is a PhD seminar. And then there's a lot of tooling up someone to be a research person fitting into the world. And that means techniques, where's the new advances, what's exciting, where could you make a difference here? So it really depends on who you're talking to. But the main line is get them excited so they want to dig into it.
Yeah. This is so much fun listening to you both. I'm going to pick up on a couple of points that Ron and Adam just mentioned. So quickly, I teach mostly MBA electives, 2 electives. One is a course just called Networks, Strategic Networks to be specific, and I teach another course on strategy implementation. That one is not exclusively on networks, but I still cover some content there. I teach in executive programs and I teach PhD. The research to practice point that Adam brought up is so interesting because back to the formation of the PDW, when Martin and I thought about that and thought tactically how we wanted to approach that, we said that who we had in mind were the Ron Burts, the Adam Kleinbaums, et cetera, of the world. We're not going to teach people how to do network analysis. We're going to teach people who are doing network research how to bring that into the classroom in a very powerful way. Ron's point about the audience mattering is so incredibly important because, well, I'm working on a book with Martin Gargiulo, and so there's somebody that we interviewed who made this comment that was really interesting. I think it was Samir Srivastava, whoever it was, said, you know, when students come into my class, they don't care that I'm a network expert. They don't care. They're there for some other reason. And so we're probably going to get to this more in some of the follow-up questions. You have to start with the end, the happy ending, what it's going to do for them, how it's going to make them successful, or what have you. And that's going to vary a lot from one audience to the next. So how I have used that with our MBAs is, you know, it's like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. I tell them I'm going to teach them to think about their networks in a very important, robust, powerful way, and they'll be able to get jobs and do other things. But along the way, what I'm really doing is I'm brainwashing them to see the whole world as a network, literally. So the structure of my course is first and foremost guided by that, just trying to hook them and land them. But I try and legitimate that by saying, we've been studying social networks, depending on how you count, for at least 50 years. And we've learned a ton of stuff that most of you have never heard of before. So I'm going to boil it down for you. And I'm going to teach you about 4 principles of networks that every human being should know. And that's how I structure my course. Do you want to know what the 4 principles are? They're going to be shocking. Wait for it. No. Homophily, closure, brokerage, and small worlds. I've left some stuff out. I've used some framing that not everybody would agree with, but by and large, if you want to say that you know something about networks, I think you got to be in that space. And that's how I approach it.
I'd like to kick in on that. It's very stimulating as usual. And that's one of the puzzles because all 3 of us can be stimulating when we're turned on by something. But in the slogging through a course, at some point, Napoleon has to get back as many men as he can out of Russia. And people are just beaten up. And I've tried to do what Bill just described by putting quiz questions into the handout that are multiple choice questions where, how would you answer this? A, B, C, D, right? And they're all reasonable. So which one's real, right? And if you can put that just ahead of every new topic, they can push the wheel one more spoke forward, yeah? So I found just keeping them moving. And a lot of the quiz questions are inside the handouts that I've posted. Some of them work really, really well. Others are more fact things that I just want to make sure they don't forget. But it's a great way to say, well, how would I do that? Because the first lecture, it's exactly what you described, Bill. But by lecture 6, you know, my boots are muddy. I've been slogging along. It's raining. And so how do you keep that going? And I found that to help a lot. But it's exactly the point you're after, of course.
It's gratifying to me to hear that you also get mud on your boots, Ron.
That's a great segue to our next question, namely, what have been the most challenging aspects of teaching social networks?
Well, I'll pick up on that a little bit and repeat myself a little bit. Like again, students when they come into my class, at least, they don't care how many citations I have and which top tier journals I've published in and so on and so forth. It's like, what can you do for me? And so when I came to Toronto 21 years ago, they said, we need some more electives. Bill, would you be interested in teaching some? Yes, absolutely. Whatever you want. I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is fantastic. Immediately I set a network course. And I was just so exuberant. I was literally like twitching when I first taught that course. And my enthusiasm got me through it, more or less. Because the feedback from the students like, Bill is a passionate educator, but we don't know what to make of what he's teaching us. That was version 1.0. Version 2.0 was a real strong tack to the research side, like Adam. And that was equally ambiguous in terms of the feedback. And version 3.0 is what I'm on now. And again, for me, and I think one of the things that I'd like you and the audience to take away from this discussion is the takeaway is not be like Ron, be like Adam, be like Bill. For me, I had to figure out two things simultaneously. What would engage these people in a conversation and how I wanted to deliver that in a way that was going to be meaningful for me as well. It was the meeting in the middle of those two things. And so I made a decision to meet them where they live, which means I make my class incredibly interactive. It's a unique format that allows me to do that. But the backbone of the course, and again, that's just the window dressing, that's just the advertisement. What they don't realize, and I don't care if they don't understand this up front, but intuitively, by the time they walk out the door, is they're going to learn about network principles. So figuring out those parameters of the course, the high level stuff, that was arguably the most difficult part for me.
Adam?
Yeah, sure. I'll go. I'd say one of the challenging things, especially in recent years, is talking about things that are not exactly what students think they are. So when you say social networks to MBA students, they immediately think that you're talking about TikTok and LinkedIn and Instagram and stuff like that. And those things have something to do with what we think of when we think of social networks, but it's not exactly the same. And certainly the way we think about them and the utility of them is not exactly the same. And so getting students to set aside what they think they know and open their mind to thinking about things in new ways can be challenging. But I think it's something that, once you've sort of gotten through to people on that front, things get much easier.
That's a really wise observation. I have 10% of the grade in my course is a final sheet of paper where you say, answer two questions. What did you expect to learn that you did? And what did you learn that you didn't expect to learn? And I use that as feedback for things I should elaborate and things I can let go. And one of the things that always comes up is believing that social media is a network and that personal character doesn't matter. Being an influencer in social media is like being rich in monopoly money, chump change, right? The thing one's really after is personal contact and engagement with diversity. And they just didn't see that initially. And so it's getting exactly to what Bill raised for the reason that Adam emphasized, which is they've got this fantasy sense because they're young. Even the PhD students, they're larva people, right? They're not really. There you go, Adam. It's going to slip out somehow. But they just don't have a life yet. And so they think these silly things are real because that's the primary thing that's in their life. So when they see all this evidence and these really respectable people who have done well by this principle or that principle, it's really eye-opening. In terms of concept, it's not a challenge. As soon as you put that out, it's like throwing bread into a pond of carp. They're just all over it. I think.
The next question might be hard to answer, but what is the most useful skill or knowledge that you think your students take away from your classes?
In fairness, I was just chatting, so let me quickly. I think the key thing they take out of mine is the information implications of network. It's not wearing pretty clothes, hanging out with people, being happy. It's about your career has the life potential of live bait if you continue doing what you're doing, right? And it's startling for people. And what brings that home is Martin Gargiulo's INSEAD network, which said, I learned all this, I saw it, and then, oh my God, it's hitting me in this particular way. It mingles the abstract with the concrete in an incredible way. And just because that's now on the table, this is a wonderful place where AI comes in. AI knows network analysis really well. Yeah. And so I asked them, ask AI what your career potential is given that network. Yeah. And it just brings it home. You know, well, street cleaning still has to happen. You know.
I want to pick up on the point about the abstract to the concrete, because I think in some way, shape, or form, all three of us are going to give that answer. And almost by definition, the topic demands it. One of the things that I struggle with, I think a lot of people do like some sort of network survey. I call it a network audit, makes it very personal. Students are always disappointed they're not top on every metric.
Yeah.
You know, so I work really, really hard to say, like, look, these metrics, they each have trade-offs. They're good for some things, and they're either useless or harmful for others. And so you've got to think about this. And again, we're coming back to what Ron mentioned a minute ago about the audience matters. They have to understand the context that they're in as well. Right? This is like part of the power of teaching about networks. It's not just this one simple rule. It's this rule depending on that. So I really work hard with them to try and understand that. And really what I want them to leave with is, you know, it's not like they come in with this misconception that there are special people in the world that are stars at networking, whatever that means, so on, and they want to become one. They think they want to become one. Once I lay out the trade-offs, that, for instance, brokerage is a bear, you know, navigating between two different communities, speaking different languages, getting caught in the middle. So yeah, you can strive for that, but is that what you want to do? So what I really try and get them to think hard about is who are they, who do they hope to become, and what their goals are, and then think about those goals relative to what these different properties have to offer.
Yeah, those are great perspectives from both of you. Thank you. I think, as Bill implied, I will say more or less the same thing in slightly different terms. I think the thing that students take away from my class that is the most useful is a network perspective. That's not to say that the network perspective is the only perspective. Of course, it's not. There are other ways of thinking about the world that can sometimes be, equally or even more insightful. But I think a network perspective can be incredibly insightful in some situations, and it's one that does not come naturally to most people. And so adding that to their sort of analytical toolkit for how they view the world and think about things, I think is incredibly valuable. And then thinking about when and where they deploy it is a skill that comes with experience.
Is there an exercise that you have used and recommend to anyone teaching a class in social networks?
Sure, I'll keep talking since I'm at it. One exercise that I use in my class that I think has only gotten to be more impactful as technology has improved is giving students a simple data set and asking them to do some analysis on it. So in my MBA class, I collect data from students on their socializing network within the MBA cohort. And an assignment that I have them do for the course is to take the network data from an earlier cohort of students and use the network data to develop a hypothesis about who ends up on student board and why, and then test their hypothesis. So it's a teeny tiny little research project. And the data required is not that extensive. And with AI, it's become incredibly easy for even the most, poetic and qualitative students to get some help doing the analysis in order to come up with an answer. And it's a topic that I think really hits close to home for students because it's about them, or at least an earlier cohort of their peers. And I think it's a really great way for them to both understand the research process better and understand how and why research can give them evidence-driven insights about the world. So that's an assignment I've really enjoyed doing.
Wow, I love that. That sounds cool. I'll go next. I do a bunch of exercises, and I think that's actually the first answer I would give to your question, because I think a single exercise by itself, like if somebody would teach a class and use just one exercise, I personally think would be dangerous, misleading. And the exercises I choose are very different from each other. And I want students to have that experience and struggle with what do these things all have to do with each other. So one that I'll mention because I do a lot of it, and it's probably different, maybe different than what Ron and Adam do, is something called the reciprocity ring. It was created by Wayne Baker. I was a slow convert on this. I'll be honest. I was desperate to have some more interactive content in my class. And I'd known about the reciprocity ring for a while, but it didn't resonate with me. So I reached out to Wayne, who was a wonderful, brilliant person. And he took the time to talk to me about it. He created the exercise and tell me about his experience. And he said to me, Bill, this is the step-by-step recipe. And in my experience, if you follow the recipe, you're going to get really good results. So, if you want to try it, try it. If not, then don't. I did try it. The response was overwhelming from the students, so much so that they convinced the MBA program to include it as part of orientation for all the incoming students every year, which I've been doing for 12 years now. The exercise is real simple. It asks everybody to come up with a request that they make in small groups to each other, and then it asks everybody to make 4 offers of assistance to help each other achieve their request. Okay, fine. It's got a very kumbaya feel to it, which is, I'll be honest, is what turned me off to it initially. The reason I like it, though, is because it really illustrates how powerful a network can be and is as a resource. Because what happens, not always, but some people get really great help on a request, and some people get pretty good help, and some people get help that probably isn't going to do anything. But every once in a while, more often than you'd think, probably every other time I do it, you get the what are the chances of experience. What are the chances of there's this person who just made a request to go to Machu Picchu or someplace, a far-flung corner of the world, and do something that you normally wouldn't do there. And somebody else in the classroom is like, oh, I just went there, actually, I can help you. And they're like, wow, that's just seems so random, but it's not random. Because if you take 20 people and you say, how many people can each one of them reasonably go to and make a referral or ask for some help or some information, pick whatever number you like, we're suddenly into the world of the exponential power of a network. That's the thing that I get from that. But I'm going to do this kumbaya kind of experience where everybody's nice and helps each other. And in the same class, I'm going to take Martin Gargiulo's simulation and power and influence and something else. And there's something that ties them all together called the network.
It's an interesting item. It highlights to me the difference between teaching an elective and a required course, in that the courses at Chicago tended to be 70 to 80 people. And this is a lot for what you just described. The courses at Bocconi tend to be 50 people. Some electives are more like in the 30 to 40 range. And this is more toward that smaller distribution, I think, to make it work. But as I've done more and more electives rather than core course, I've forgotten the floaters, right? The people who sit in the back of the room and don't read, and you don't want them on a team because they'll drag everybody else down. So I try to give as much independence to individuals as possible so that they can push themselves hard. Occasionally, there'll be a set of people who are so good that they just get a chariots of fire thing going with one another. And then something like what you described can be fantastic. But I've always got this stratified population. And I don't want to insult the halt and the lame, but I also want to make sure the lead can break out. So I rely primarily on Martin's, here's what your network looks like, here's how it works. And then good ones I'll put into a group to talk to one another about what it looks like. And then the people who just want to observe, sit in the back of the room, mazel tov, be well, leave them alone. But it's always that kind of stratification. You look for where the energy is, and then you pull that. And interestingly, when there is some energy, you can infect some of those people who are sitting around the perimeter watching it. But it takes the kind of energy you just showed. And so I'm always mixed on these massive assignment things. But I get the point. Very nice. I can imagine you pulling it off.
This is really useful. Thank you.
So, which social network topics or skills do you think are underemphasized and how people usually teach social networks and might deserve a little bit more class time?
I'll be quick because both of you look like you're thinking, although Adam leaned in, and it was rude of me to speak so quickly. I think personal character is an item that just isn't given attention. We're so focused on what the social creates that we forget a lot of what it creates depends on personal character and just the way you present yourself, your concern for other people, as opposed to the egocentrism that's so common among young people. I might be influenced in the work I've done more recently around strong bridges, what makes bridges really hold and endure. And the key thing that is being generous, helping people when they need help and they feel they need it. And that just stays with you over your life. It's an incredible thing. There's no window to bring that in easily enough, but it's incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great answer, Ron. And I would broaden it even a little bit more and say that more generally, antecedents of networks don't get as much attention as they deserve. There's a huge amount of work, going back to Ron's massively influential book, but even before that to an extent as well, about the consequences of networks and why and how they're advantageous. But how and why those advantageous structures come about seems like a really important question, especially for students who want to think about how they can build the networks that will enable them to experience advantage.
Yeah, I agree with both of those points. I'll add two more. One is a quick one, which is not a very bold forecast because we all know it's coming. AI is going to be in these classes in a big way very soon. In fact, this year's proposal for the Teaching Social Networks PDW includes a speaker who's going to talk about an AI tool, like an AI coached kind of tool. For me, the thing that I think I'd love to see more of is very biased by my research interests, and for sure Adam's, and I think Ron's as well, is a little bit more on the design of organizations or settings or situations with networks in mind. So think about it. It's like, okay, if we have people building bridges, we're going to get this nice result as far as innovation or something like that. So to Adam's point, like, well, where do bridges come from? Maybe they come from these things that we do in the organizational environment. So things about interventions and designs, I think it's got not just huge teaching potential, but huge research potential as well. It's just a fascinating area. And I try and do a little bit with that with something called design thinking. And it's a nice methodology for structured creativity, brainstorming, et cetera. But I task them with designing a network to accomplish something as one of the assignments. And it's tough. It's really tough, but it's fun.
because the right network is so contingent on the setting. And if you're just designing a network, you're missing the key point. For example, when BP implemented its peer assists in a commodity business, it failed abysmally. It was designed for where there's a lot of information variation, which goes back to Stigler's paper in 61 on the economics of information. Where there's variation, networks are fantastic. Where there's homogeneous information, it's all about squeeze as much as you can out of being efficient. That's the place for closed networks. If someone designs stuff like, I'm going to create an innovative organization, lots of brokers, and a commodity market, you're a dead man. All you did was increase overhead costs. Yeah? So it's an interesting mix. And I found cases are a good way to bring that in. But it is along the lines of what you're saying, both you designing your own network, but also I just became an operating partner in a private equity firm that is going to make networks a key piece to where do we invest and where do we not. And one of the preambles is, are the holes in the right place? Are the brokers there? Who are they? You can imagine how it plays through. But one of the key issues in this market, brokers would be a kiss of death. They just cost too much and you don't get enough yield. In this market, closure would be a kiss of death because it's exploding. But you can imagine the play, and it's very much the design idea.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point, not drawing on Stiglitz, but drawing on Galbraith, that as we think about this idea of design, I think Ron is exactly right that how you design organizations is fundamentally contingent on the environment. And Galbraith talked, 50 plus years ago at this point about, designing not only the formal organization, but also the informal organization in response to that. And I think that's a piece that, as Bill knows very well, has often been overlooked and ignored in the literature, but is really just beginning to come back in a way that's very exciting. So, Ron, if we really look forward to seeing how this private equity fund plays out, and if you need any help, Bill and I are signing up to raise our hands.
That's right. Easy.
Just to pick up on what you said with respect to what Bill said, the same thing holds for individual careers. So Bill was casting in terms of identity and who do you want to be. But I've had some people who have very close networks and they like it and it's trust and all this good stuff. But I don't want a career that's going to put me with these people for the rest of my life. Yeah? I want occasionally some variation in that. So this identity piece is independent of the environment is dangerous. Yes, there's who I am, but what sort of identity is going to be interesting into the future? Anyway, it's just such a fun topic. My God. Oy. Talk about lucky.
Talk about lucky. You said it.
It's so fascinating, like what you discussed is not just food for thought for teaching, but also a lot of junior scholars are thinking about in terms of like research topics in the future. So these are all very inspiring. Thank you so much. Our next question, you sort of have touched on it when you talk about social networks and people's myth. So feel free to skip it if you feel like you don't have other things to say. But we are curious about what are the common misconceptions students or popular media have about networks, and or is there a myth that you find yourself correcting repeatedly? Anything like that that can correct our or the popular media's biases against these kind of topics?
I think the
I'll
obvious
start.
one for me. Oh, sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Go ahead. I don't have anything very compelling, so.
Well, neither do I. I think the obvious one for me is the simplistic idea that bigger is better. I think one of the challenges of giving students any kind of feedback about their networks is they immediately jump to the conclusion that bigger is better. And no matter how hard I bend over backwards in my words and in my slides and in the content of a report, people are simply unable to hear that it's not true that bigger is better. So getting people to take this more nuanced perspective, not just in thinking about networks, but in thinking about their own network in particular, is very hard. And I think as organizations, people, like, we understand the psychology well enough to know that there are emotions attached to this that preclude people from really thinking as rationally as we might like them to be. But that's challenging.
That was actually one of my points. On my first day, I actually talk about, I don't quite frame them quite so dramatically as being myths, but kind of like conceptions of networks that are not the conception that we're going to talk about in this class. So there's 5 different ones. And the first one is personality. A network is not simply, it's not just, all of these are, it's not just personality. Second one is ties, which might sound surprising. Individual ties, that is, because that's a lot of times when people talk about, they talk about their relationship or something like that. Adam got the third one, size, which I frame in terms of a Rolodex. It's not the size of your Rolodex. The fourth one we talked about already, technology, the platforms. And then the last one I think is the most important one, is about property. The property rights on this form of capital cannot be individually exclusively owned. They must be shared. And I think that's the hardest one for me to get across. Because first of all, they've never heard somebody talk about networks and relationships in terms of capital, social capital. Maybe they might have heard the term, but they just don't kind of get what it means. It's necessarily shared and negotiated is kind of my view, and I try and bring them around to that. It's very tough. It's very, very tough, given that my experience is that in most of their, especially higher education, they're focused on individual based explanations and methodological individualism and things like personality. So it's very hard to move them off of some of these ideas, or at least for me it is.
One way into it, and the point that Adam made is certainly one I see, and that then flies over to social media as if they're real networks, the same sort of story, because number of contacts becomes your primary metric there. But I avoid it and solve it by focusing on information. So if you want trusted information, if you want information that people agree on, then the closed network works, but you're limited to whatever it is you've already settled on. So you're digging a hole, and if it's in the desert, you're just not going to get anything out of this except a deeper hole. There's a cost to larger. The diversity of information is there, but it's also confusing. And also, people don't trust you as a source on this information. It's great as gossip, but it's horrible as authoritative information. As soon as you start talking that way, people realize this is really a two-way street in terms of the trust in information and getting information, using information. What do I really pay attention to? Most people have filters, so they ignore the diversity of information they're exposed to, so they don't have to engage it, right? And one reason why trusted, diverse contacts are important is those are multiple portals into you that'll make you pay attention to things that don't make sense initially, yeah? So I think you're exactly right. And the myth that you mentioned, Adam, and Bill, you're spot on in terms of the difficulty of this. But once you tie it to the information and the costs, it sort of solves out. It's just a cost-benefit equation. You know, which one do you want to go with? And then we have this wonderful information on it, just so much research. That's a big difference from when even you, Adam, started in this. I mean, you started a little later than I did in this, but there's so much information now.
Thank you.
As we're wrapping up our classroom questions, do you have any advice for anyone looking to develop a class on social networks?
Yes, do it. Seriously. One of the visions that Martin and I had for the PDW, it was a lofty aspiration that social networks as a topic become taken for granted in the business school curriculum. I don't know as if we've accomplished that. I'm pretty sure we have not. There's certainly a lot of activity, hopefully more than when we started the workshop, and that's not just spurious correlation. It will be the most exhilarating, if you're a network researcher, the most exhilarating experience you can imagine. Like, what can be better? The thing that you just are fascinated with, you get to talk about in front of students all the time and learn from them as well. And it will also be incredibly frustrating for the reasons that we've been talking about, and challenging, because the idea of networks as a perspective, which is really how I've come to think about it, even just recently, as opposed to a paradigm or a theory or something. It's all of those things too, but it's really a perspective. It's a different way of looking at the world. And if you haven't looked at the world that way, people just think you're crazy. So come join us in the revolution.
Ditto. Perfect.
I would say the only thing I can add to that, and at risk of being a little bit meta, is use your network as you develop the course. The PDW is a great example, but more generally, there's a whole community of people doing this kind of teaching, and most of us are very happy and willing to collaborate and help and share. And so if you can tap your network to help you do this work, you can do it better.
In fact, a brief statement, if you don't have the network, ask AI. AI knows where everybody's slides are buried, and it's easy to get to.
Good advice.
Thank you for the great advice.
So for our last question, we like to end on something a little that's fun, a little bit controversial. We're trying to boost our ratings just a little bit. So I'm curious who you all would put on your Mount Rushmore of social network researchers.
Ooh, I'm going to go first on this one, if I may. And at risk of sounding like I'm sucking up, I would put two people on my Mount Rushmore of social network research. The first is Mark Granovetter, whose name has been put out there as potentially the first sociologist to have been shortlisted for the Nobel Prize in Economics. I think for all of the reasons why his work is so massively cited, he deserves to be the first. And I think Ron Burt deserves to be the second. Ron's work has influenced a generation of scholars who found his notion of structural holes to be just incredibly generative for a whole variety of different kinds of research. And that inspiration and that sort of analytical rigor that his work has had puts him there too. So thank you, Ron.
Yeah, I'll go next. And first, I want to thank you for putting us in this incredibly vulnerable, uncomfortable position of leaving out people who are going to resent it and hold us accountable for the rest of our lives. I have two answers and a rebuttal. So you mentioned Mount Rushmore, and when I look at Mount Rushmore, I think old dead white guys. And so if we're talking about founders, we're talking about Zimmel and Moreno and Milgram and a woman, Elizabeth Bott, who is a Canadian, by the way, or immigrated to Canada. But if we're talking about the modern era, for me, this is my intellectual journey, it starts with Harrison White and James Coleman. And it's hard to think of sorry, I don't want to offend anybody, but so much of what we think of as really substantial work seems to flow from those two individuals. And here's the rebuttal, that yes, there has been a Nobel committee that convened and discussed a prize in network science. And if we're going to do that, let's change the prize to not be for an individual, but as network researchers, let's think about the configuration or the team or the trajectories or histories or what have you. And on that list, I would give a joint prize, first and foremost, to Mark Granovetter and Ron Burt. I defy anybody to challenge me on that. And then from there, it gets very interesting because there's lots of different directions that the field has moved.
I'll challenge you on that. There, in fact, has been a Nobel symposium on networks, and Mark was there, and I was there, and Matt Jackson, of course, would have to be there. John Kleinberg was there. Christakis was there. There's a lot of really smart people doing fun things here. To answer the key question and then move on to that, I would have put Durkheim, Lazarsfeld, and Claude Fisher on there. And the reason is they moved the wheel forward. Durkheim's Suicide is a phenomenal study in networks without network data, but it immediately lends itself to all these hypotheses. Lazarsfeld, with his election studies and the survey that got us the opinion leaders, set an empirical stage. And Claude Fisher, with his Bay Area survey, set the stage for the GSS and a variety of other things. If we didn't have those, we would have the kind of research that was characteristic of the Harvard graduate students in Mark Granovetter's day, which is the Nancy Lee, Milgram, and Granovetter. All of these were search algorithm ideas that if you go through the ties that are outside your usual ties, you get better information. But the data were horrible on all of them. They're just entertaining. I mean, it's sort of a classic graduate student at Harvard kind of thing. And what changed with Claude and then the GSS is systematic data on the relationships around a relationship. And suddenly it was the whole that got spanned, whether it was weak or strong. Yeah, it's just a matter of having the data. So I don't think I would matter that much so much as the technology changed and opened up a view on what had been an insight in the 70s of weak ties, which is a graduate student paper. How remarkable is that? This incredible paper that Mark wrote was from his graduate student days. The next one, is it language? Is it history? There are all these new developments. And so what will be the breakthrough technology that moves us? And the reason why Holes has lasted as long as it's had is once we had information on the data relations around a relationship, we could then start getting systematic, reliable results. Before that, we never had them. We had this illustrative, anecdotal information from Bott, from Mark, etc. Once we had systematic data, everybody can join in. Suddenly it turned into a science. And that's the era we're in now. And Lord knows where it's going to go. So Durkheim laid a foundation, Lazarsfeld gave us empirics, and Claude really took those empirics to what we're doing now, I think. None of them will be mentioned, of course, for a Nobel.
I hope we see the Nobel Prize move in that direction. It would be.
I think it's iffy.
Yeah,
there's so many political divisions, right. Not angry ones, but no. Just a lot of dimensions to this area.
Right.
We took away so much from this conversation, from interesting class design ideas to challenging topics and fascinating classroom exercises, and much more. We can't thank you enough for your time and wisdom.
You're very kind. And
very nice.
Bill and Adam, it's just so nice to see you.
Likewise.
Just always nice.
Yes, looking forward to the next opportunity too. Hope to see you all in Philadelphia, if not sooner.
That's right. We'll see you there.
Same.
Yeah.
Take care. Thank you very much. The cat looks very nice, by the way.
Be well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
We loved talking to Ron, Adam, and Bill, three absolutely inspiring academics, about teaching social networks. We feel so inspired after this conversation and look forward to future conversations on this topic.
If you liked today's episode, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We're looking forward to getting your feedback. If you have any suggestions, feel free to email us at communications.sns@gmail.com. We look forward to touching base with you.